Welcome once again to the Radical Imagination. I'm your host, Jim Vrettos. I'm a sociologist who's taught at John Jay College of Criminal Justice and Yeshiva University here in New York City. On May 4th, 2012, a Manhattan judge convicted 20 activists of disorderly conduct for an October 2011 arrest outside a Harlem police precinct, protesting the NYPD's controversial stop and frisk policy. The trial drew national and international attention for being one of the largest and most politically charged group trials the city had seen in recent years. Data revealed that New Yorkers had been subjected to police stops and street interrogations more than 5 million times since 2002. Black and Latino communities were the overwhelming target of these police tactics. In 2011, over 685,000 people were stopped. Close to 90% were Black and Latino men. Nearly 90% were found to have been completely innocent. Civil rights activist and trial defendant Cornel West put it this way: "The system is terrorizing and breaking the spirit of too many young people, mostly Black and brown. We were willing to be arrested. We're willing to go to jail. The trial gives us a chance to dramatize it in a more intense manner, and that's beautiful." 3 of those activists are here today on the Radical Imagination to share in the commemoration of the 10th anniversary of the trial. Reverend Stephen Phelps served 3 years as interim senior minister of Riverside Church in New York City. He's now developing themes from 3 decades of ministry for several books he's writing. Carl Dix is a founding member of the Revolutionary Communist Party USA and deserves the lion's share of credit for organizing the 2011 protest and subsequent 2012 trial that helped change the narrative about stop and frisk in the city and around the country. Carl has been a lifelong activist and organizer and was a member of the Fort Lewis Six, the largest mass refusal of orders to go to Vietnam during the war. As a result, he was imprisoned for 2 years at Leavenworth Military Penitentiary. Martin Stolar has been a civil rights and criminal defense attorney for over 50 years. He's literally represented thousands of arrested protesters and demonstrators, including Black Panthers, Young Lords, anti-war activists, welfare mothers, Occupy Wall Street, Black Lives Matter, climate change activists, the Camden 28, inmates of the 1971 Attica Rebellion, and many, many others. He's been a member of the National Lawyers Guild, serving several times as president of the New York City chapter. He was the lead lawyer, guiding force, steadying hand, and calming influence during our trial. Sociologist and welfare rights activist Richard Cloward was fond of saying that radical lawyers were the crucial element in the success of any movement. Marty was that crucial force for us as we came to trust his integrity, commitment, expertise, and radical love during our week-long trial experience. So, welcome all. It's great to see you all again.
Great to be together.
It really is.
Thank you for having us on.
Thank you so much. Of course, we haven't aged a day in 10 years. But this is, give or take a few days, I guess it's May 4th, the vote came down. But this is the 10th anniversary of the trial. It was an important trial. And as I said, Carl, you really deserve the lion's share of this. You were really have been thinking about this, have been organizing the protests and so on. So tell our audience a little bit about how you came to get this thing off the ground. What was going on in your mind, and how did you organize this?
Well, look, we were looking at the situation, and when I say we in the Revolutionary Communist Party, because this was a collective decision that we came to, that we needed to initiate this campaign to stop it. We came to it because we could see that stop and frisk was part of a spearhead of an attack of near genocidal proportions targeting Black people, Latinos, and other oppressed groupings, and had the potential to, as Cornell said, break the spirit of a people whose resistance had been crucial to transforming things here in this country. And I'm talking about Black people who, through the civil rights movement, Black liberation struggle, sparked off the 1960s. And we could go even farther back than that. But we looked at this, we looked at the numbers of people who were being imprisoned. We looked at the way police were being unleashed to brutalize, harass, arrest, and even murder Black and brown people. And we said we have to act to stop this. We also said, now we can't do this on our own. We have to reach out. We have to bring others into it. And when we decided to do it, I took the initiative to Cornell West and said to the brother, like, look, we got to do this. Here's why. He readily agreed. And then I said, I need more than your agreement. I need your body in the street. You got to be with me in this, because if I go out there by myself and do this, you know, it may represent the same kind of spirit, but it won't have the impact. So Cornell readily agreed. I think our initial flyer said something like, its title was something like, From Up Against the Wall to Up in Their Faces. Stand up to stop and frisk. And it sketched out a civil disobedience campaign. And then we decided, let's get some other people into it, including people who themselves don't face the day-to-day harassment that Black people and Latino people did in New York around stop and frisk. And then we tried to put the call out everywhere, and some people responded. You know, we had, well, religious people like
Reverend Phelps, that's Steve.
Responded. And at the time, I think you were the head minister at Riverside.
That's right.
And, you know, it was like we thought about, well, should we go ask this guy? Because, you know, Riverside, that's a pretty high up there place. Would he want to put that on the line to do this? And we decided we had to ask people like that. We put the call out at Occupy Wall Street. We put it out to college students across the country. I remember some people from Columbia. A Black student group from Columbia, Black students
against mass incarceration. Right.
2 of them were part of it. Some people from Occupy Wall Street came up. And we did this 3 times. The trial that we had was only for the one in Manhattan. There were other people who came on. Reverend Barrios came on board. The actor Benga Akinagbe got arrested with us. This is in Brooklyn. I'm in Brooklyn now. People like that came with us. And it was important that these people got in because it helped to amplify the impact. And we decided we had to start in Harlem. So that is how this came. And we felt that if we were able to do this on the level it needed to be, we could create a situation where, you know, local officials who felt they had all the wind at their back and talking about crime and how they were acting to stop crime and refusing to acknowledge the disproportionate racial impact of this, we could create a situation where they would be back on the defensive and they would feel under pressure to back away from this policy. But even more than that, that people who hate aspects of the way people are forced to live, either themselves or others, would get some wind to their back. They would feel more justified and right in standing up against this. And this is what we were going for. And
that was the call that I believe I heard was at Riverside. So Steve, if you can hop in here,
Sure.
You heard from Carl and you decide what was going on in your head there.
Well, a little bit of background. Back in the spring of 2010, NPR had done a story, local, in WNYC. Elise, I forget her name. She's now with the national radio. Elise something or other did a fine story, that is to say, arresting and horrifying story about stop and frisk. So I recall coming alive to the issue just with that story and those facts in the spring of 2010. I began my ministry at Riverside in January 2011. That was also the year of the commemoration of the rebellion at Attica, which took place in September of 2011. And I involved Riverside in that process as soon as I could.
1971, you meant, right? The Attica Rebellion of 1971?
The 40th anniversary of that rebellion.
Right, exactly.
Took place in 2011. And so there were, the helpful side of this is the contacts I was making with Sophia Elijah at the Correctional Association, with Sarah Burns and some others. And so one way or another, when Carl came in the company of, do you remember, Carl, who you were with? Was it Phil Graham? Phil Farnham?
Yes,
I don't remember.
Phil Farnham.
Two of you asked for some time and came to the study that I had there, Riverside. And also there was a hunger strike in what's the matter with me, the prison in California underway at that time. So there were just many, many important ways in which the issue of injustice, what I often call the criminal American justice system, rather than flipping those words the other way, was in the spotlight. And I was really very grateful for Carl Dix's visit to my study and the request for the body on the line that he put there. I recall that I did not answer in the moment. I waited a day. And
you did? Okay. What did you do during that day?
Talk it over with important counselors and friends. Not for a long time, but a day was key. Mm. And I was well decided by, I believe it was a Friday, and called Carl up and said, I'm in. And that's how my connection began. I've been so grateful to Carl ever since, and everything that happened as a result. Absolutely. There are other stories to tell, but I'll hold up for now.
Hold up for that. And then how did Marty get involved in this? Who called up Marty? You weren't praying. Did you do a couple of prayers there, Marty?
No, that's not quite my personality.
That's not your personality. No. Okay. So did Carl talk to you about?
I don't recall who asked me to become involved. I'm sure Carl was part of that because I had known and had worked with Carl on some prior demonstration cases raising the same issue. This one was a case that was sort of designed for what I'm delighted to do. It's a pleasure to represent activists who say, I want to go to trial in court and make an issue in court about what I was demonstrating about in the street. And if I can figure out a way to help do that, then I've done my job as a lawyer in a case of this nature. And in this case, I was able to do that. Having a select group of defendants who were capable of expressing themselves and expressing why they were out there doing the demonstration that they were doing contributed to it. But also, being a lawyer is sort of trying to create a factual issue for the judge to chew about while we're really playing out the underlying political issue of why we're in court in the first place. And the notion of a conviction and the consequences of a conviction become a lesser important aspect of the case than carrying forward the protest that started in the street and that we were able to tie up the courtroom with for 5 straight days and carry on the story that way.
Which you didn't expect.
Wait,
Right?
wait. One thing I got to tell you though, right? You said at the outset here that 20 people were convicted. Actually, only 19 people got convicted.
Oh,
One of the defendants, Jose, got acquitted. My client. So there was
LaSalle,
one
right?
actual.
Okay, all right, there you go. Well,
Can I back up one step to the
Absolutely.
night of the demonstration? The green hats of NLG. I cannot tell you. I could never fully express the joy in my heart to see those green hats of your volunteer lawyers, Marty, or the volunteer lawyers of National Lawyers
Well,
Guild.
they're the lawyers from the organization that I'm very much connected to.
Right, that's a fair way to put it, of course. But that is it's a very clever bit of signage for the demonstrators and maybe the police and other onlookers to see this sprinkling of the green hats, and maybe somebody asks, "What are they?" And they find out, and it's a really important thing.
What they're really designed for is to let the police know that there's somebody looking over
Yep.
their shoulder.
Makes sense.
And
Well,
there's no legal authority to stop police misconduct, but it does have that effect. And
Telling
it
effect.
gives everybody a little peace of mind when the green hats come out.
And one other effect is when you come out of jail at midnight, as we did, and there they are. These men and women are, and boy, is that a big deal. I loved it, and I've been donating to you ever since.
And when we came out, we all waited until the last one came out, and that was the solidarity that was created.
Right.
It was just unbelievable. It's beautiful. But Marty, I just want to go back to, you didn't expect this to be a 5-day trial, or did you? I mean,
Well, it certainly was not going to be a one-day trial. There were too many police officers involved, and there were too many defendants involved. And if everybody wanted to take the witness stand, which was an open question, then that's at least 20 people testifying. So that's not going to happen in a day.
right.
So I knew it was going to be a long time. And part of what makes it interesting is that we can carry it out for a period of time so that, the public can see it, the media can see what's going on, and the reasons that all these very important and wise activists are in court and making a stand here. Now, let me add something. You talked about at the beginning about what this did, and the case actually did have an effect, along with the civil rights case that was brought by the Center for Constitutional Right that brought out all the data and got the federal court judge to put an injunction on the police stop and frisk stuff. But I have to tell you, it's back.
Yeah.
The new police commissioner and the new mayor are now doing exactly the same thing that we did this trial about. And it really pisses me off that we let them get away with it. They're using another excuse. Now it's okay, we're going to go get the guns. And what that means is that they stop and frisk anybody who looks suspicious. And what suspicious means is you're black or you're brown or your clothing is a little off from what everybody else's clothing is.
What do you mean, Marty?
Go ahead.
What do you mean, Marty, when you say we let them get away with this? What did you mean?
I'm looking for people to stand up to the mayor, to stand up to the police commissioner and bitch and scream about what's going on. And maybe we got to go back to federal court, and maybe we got to go back to the precinct that everybody got arrested for to say the same thing and to raise the question again. But they're back to doing it again, and it really is annoying.
No, and this is very important. And in fact, I wanted to get to that in my next thing, but Marty has already raised it, because Eric Adams is not only bringing back stop and frisk, and he has declared he's going to do that. This is not me reading his mind. He said publicly, we're bringing back stop and frisk. We're bringing back elite units like the street crimes unit, the one that murdered Amadou Diallo and got away with it. We're rolling back some of the so-called reforms done at Rikers. We're going to make bail harder to get. We're going to try to change the way that prosecutors have to give information to defense attorneys so that they can build cases. And see, he is bringing back many aspects of the Giuliani program, which Stop and Frisk was a key plank on. And coming from that, I have publicly called him a black Giuliani because that's what it is. It's because he's black doesn't mean that Stop and Frisk is going to somehow become different, or these things are not going to target black and brown people. And in fact, last night, two members of the Revolution Club, an organization that I'm affiliated with. I'm a little too old to be out in the streets with them day in, day out, the way they roll. They went to speaking engagement that the mayor did, and they interrupted it, calling him out as a black Giuliani who's bringing back Stop and Frisk and all the other stuff. This just happened last night.
Good for them. Good for them.
Yeah, definitely. We were trying to push the word out through social media. It didn't really break into the major media, even though there was a lot of media there. But we are going to go after the city on this and Adams on this, because the Giuliani era, even if you bring back Giuliani's program, even without him, it's the same thing. And we are not going to sit back and let this happen. In fact, in a couple of days on May 1st, we're going to be marching in Harlem to mark the Revolutionary Internationalist holiday, May Day, and we're going to hammer at that. Those two people who called out Adams as a black Giuliani are going to be speaking. We're going to do it in front of the precinct at 135th Street, because that's an area that we've been doing work, but we are going for this. And that precinct that we did, which is down around 123rd in Harlem, you can go there too at some point. But Marty is right. People have to be in the streets around this. People can't fall for this, because if they fall for it because there's a black guy telling them it's okay, that's actually works for the system that needs Stop and Frisk and other suppressive methods to suppress people who they are afraid will stand up the way black people stood up in the 1960s and sparked much broader protest, opposition, and rebellion. And we need that and more. In fact, we need a revolution to get rid of a system that needs police forces that operate this way. And that revolution is something that I've dedicated my life to working for, and I'm still in it. I'm still out here, probably a step slower than I was back in the day, but still stepping.
That's okay. That's all right. So when does it become, I don't know if this can even be answered, but when is the time for another trial, another demonstration that leads to arrests? I mean, how do we know when that should occur? Impossible, right?
If I may,
Sure.
Whether people decide that it's a measure of civil disobedience that is the correct political move or not is really a political decision. There are lots of other ways to do things. It's only when somebody decides that civil disobedience is the way to do it, to take the risk of getting arrested in order to put your body on the line in order to carry out the protest, that I become involved. And that, it's going to be really interesting to see how this works. Let me just put a preface on this. My wife is a public defender in Harlem, and she represents teenage kids, and her kids are getting arrested. Her clients are getting arrested for seeing a car drive down the street, recognizing who's in the car, and turning around and walking the other way. The cops jump out of the car and chase the kid down and search him and arrest him for whatever they happen to find in his pockets. This is not a fiction. This is really going on. And the cases come into the courts and motions are made and everybody complains, but it's, getting arrested for civil disobedience is only one thing. Adams is a black Giuliani. What he's doing is very scary. The black police commissioner that he's got, who is bringing back Stop and Frisk. It's not a racial thing. It's a total class thing. That's where they're at. And it's really scary what they're doing. So I'm glad to see that Carl's out there with friends. Stephen, I hope you and your folks are going to be out there again also raising the question. And I'll back you up, whatever you need. I'll back you up if you happen to run afoul of the law.
I'll remember that.
Same here. Same here. I'll do my bit with the academic community. But Stephen, what about your community? What about the spiritual community? The people that you're associating with, are they ready to move forward on this?
Well, I'm certainly not going to be able to speak widely for others, partly because I'm retired and I am less connected by far than I used to be. That said, I will not hold back from my general critique of religion as what I might call really existing religion, along the lines of some other uses of that modifier, really existing, which is that the functions of religion are diverse, and one of them that is really tragic is the tendency to cooperate with coercive power and state power and keep things all nailed down. That is one of the ways that religion has shown up in history. My own view is that that's a travesty of the intentions of the spiritual formation of individuals and communities, but it happens a lot. In fact, I would say the majority of religion, the expressions of religion, are anti-revolutionary. They are dangerously supportive of the worst coercive tactics. If you needed an exhibit, you just go look at Mr. Putin going to church on Orthodox Easter Sunday, last Sunday. What is a man like Putin doing in church? Well, let's not even bother trying to answer the question. So yes, there are, as there have always been, significant communities and leaders of communities who want to organize, who do organize to end injustices of the kind that we organized around. And I'll tell you one story briefly that still impinges on the story of 10 years ago. In I wouldn't remember, spring or the fall, a group of 10 clergy, mostly from the East Side, had an audience with Ray Kelly, Commissioner Ray Kelly. And I was annoyed by my colleagues' softball questions posed to the commissioner, who, of course, we know, and most of the listeners and viewers here will remember that name, Ray Kelly, as Michael Bloomberg's choice for police commissioner and the implementer of stop and frisk as it ramped up and up and up towards 700,000 stops per year at the time of our demonstration. So the softball questions were quite troubling to me, and I had a moment, and I said to Mr. Kelly, to Commissioner Kelly, I said, men in my church, men of color, are crossing the street to the other side, staying inside their homes when they see the squad cars go down the street. They are avoiding the men in blue as much as possible. And this cannot be good for the city because it creates a tone of fear everywhere. And it's been a travesty of justice. I said all of that to him. And that the relationship of causing men to be afraid was a kind of terrorism. And he was annoyed with my statement, and he said, look, somebody has to pay for safety in this city. That is a quote. You can take it to the
wow.
To it. Somebody has to pay for safety in this city. So that's a very serious statement or way to capture all of the evil that's caught up in stop and frisk. It is a kind of state terrorism, which is we have the law on our side, therefore we will terrorize part of the population to accomplish certain political objectives. As to whether, I'll be brief, one more sentence, as to whether religious organizations of any kind will have an unusually bright response and effective response to this injustice or to any other. I have my doubts.
Well, if I can give a short response to that in this way, and hopefully the undertaking that we've become involved in Union Theological will reduce some of the doubts.
Yeah.
I'm feel very pleased that we are have co-founder of the Institute for the Prevention of Violence, the bringing about of the Blessed Community, which is going to be housed at Union. And we're going to bring academics and activists into our institute, and we're going to have a symposium, a 2-day symposium that will be entitled "Rethinking Violence: Religion, Morality, and Peace: Creative Responses." Among the guest speakers are Jeffrey Sachs, Carl Hart, psychologist, neuroscientist, leading struggle against the drug movement, the war on drugs, Susanna Heschel from the prophetic Jewish tradition, and Lisa Harper, who is a Christian evangelical from a progressive spiritual tradition. And my co-founders are Bandy Lee, who wrote the book, edited the book, The Dangerous Case of Donald Trump, and James Gilligan, whose his entire life has been active in reducing and writing about and clinically dealing with the most violent of our citizens and so on, in prison and out. So we're trying to bridge some of our orientations, our worldviews, legally, academically. We envision it as an interdisciplinary, inter-university enterprise that will get us out in the streets as well. So I'm just throwing that out there, and our first event will be on the 6th and 7th. And so we are, obviously, I'm committed to what we're talking about here, and I'm ready to help out in any way we can with our institute personally. So Carl, you have any response to what Steve was just saying?
Well, I mean, I think Steve is hitting on something, because look, when we went to Steve about the stop and frisk thing, there was actually some debate about whether we were wasting our time. And I was like, I didn't know Steve at the time. I didn't know his history. I learned some of that in asking him to do this. I learned about his relationship to Attica in the aftermath of the rebellion there, not at the time of the rebellion, but afterwards. And the point is, we have to transform a situation where too much of the clergy is on the sideline in relation to key issues of injustice. And I think that's the situation right now. People have to step out and act. Some are doing this and some aren't. I mean, you could take an example of a woman's right to choose to have an abortion. That right is hanging by a thread, and the Supreme Court is poised to maybe cut that thread. And not nearly enough people are taking to the streets. There are some. There's a group called Rise Up for Abortion Rights. It was co-founded by, among other people, my comrade Sunsara Taylor.
Right.
And they are in the streets around this. They're calling on others to get in the streets with them around this. They're going to have a national week of action to defend abortion rights, May 8th to May 14th. And I really encourage people to check that out. One of the things that they're trying to do is they're trying to on the one hand, reach to those affected, the women and especially the young women who are going to lose a right potentially that they felt was theirs. It had been settled decades ago before many of them were born. But we also have to reach much more broadly and ask people where they stand on this and challenge them with action. That's what we were doing with Stop and Frisk. We were challenging them with action. And we're aiming to do it again. We'll have to figure out the forms for it.
Right.
But it is back.
Right.
And last night, when the two young people in the Revolution Club called Adams out as a black Giuliani at Cooper Union, it was.
Yeah.
They didn't do that because they knew the crowd at Cooper Union would be with them. They did it because they knew it was necessary to bring the truth out, argue for it, even if most people would yell at you and boo. And it wasn't most, but there was a division of the crowd.
Right.
Clearly those who were booing and saying shut up, at the same
Right.
time some other people were clapping and saying you're saying the truth, and acknowledging that and giving them support for it. And then they said to the people who were supporting them, we appreciate you supporting us, but you got to get out of your seats and get with us on this, because we got to stop it. And that's how we have to do this for everybody. And it's
Understood.
important that at this point we do have some people in the religious community who are standing on this. Steve is an example. Cornel West, of course, is an example. There are others. And we have to challenge them to reach out and bring more in and challenge those others who are on the sidelines. And for me, I'm coming at all of this as part of building a movement, an actual revolution in this country, because that is what's going to be necessary to end all of these horrors. And look, this will air after May 1st when we take to the streets in Harlem. But people need to get with us, because when we celebrate May 1st as a revolutionary holiday, it's not a once a year thing and then we fold up and go back until the next year.
Right.
Absolutely.
Being out in the streets and building a movement. And people need to check us out and get with it. They can come to Revolution Books up in Harlem, connect with us. You can look for me there. If I'm not there at the time, they know where I am and what I'm doing, and they can hook you up.
We will, Carl. I want to, in the few minutes we have left, too, I want to spend a little time, and certainly the academic world needs to wake up as well. So we need to challenge them. But I'd like to go back for a few minutes on the trial and that we had. And Marty, how did you steer the issues as you saw it during that week? And as you pointed out, what were you thinking in terms of trying to present the case in a way that it also became politically important, but also perhaps at a judicial level, we would, the judge had some way of giving us some sense of justice there. If you know what I'm trying to say.
Part of the skill about doing a political trial is meshing together the legal and the political.
Absolutely.
And with this judge, we basically set up to cross-examine the police officers about what they saw, what they heard. Did they actually have the proof that each of the defendants had committed the alleged criminal act with which they were charged? But we also spent a little time asking them about their own participation in the street crime unit and their own participations in Stop and Frisk, and raising the question on cross-examination. Even the judge wasn't really interested in hearing it. We didn't quite get to the notion that we were justified in the conduct, which sometimes occurs in a political trial, but we certainly allowed everybody who wanted to get up and say why they were present and why they were protesting, to give them a platform to say so, and to speak to the world, to speak to the court, and the judge listened to them.
Yeah.
The judge listened. The public listened. These are not crazy Yahoo people. These are people testifying under oath about their true beliefs, about why they felt it incumbent upon themselves to engage in civil disobedience, to risk getting arrested and charged with a crime, that's pretty heavy stuff. And there's a good lore in American history where that kind of conduct is genuinely looked on favorably. And the judge in this case, of course, knows that history, but is constrained by his position, of course, to have to find everybody guilty. But if you noticed in the sentences that were handed out, nobody really got hurt. The worst part of the sentence was that some money had to be paid. Right?
It was court costs, was it not, Marty?
Well, there's what's called a surcharge,
Okay.
which the money goes in to pay the court budget.
So would you call the sanction a message on the part of the judge? Was he saying
Not
something?
particularly. If the judge wanted to send a sanction, the judge could have said, sentence people to jail.
I realize. So the fact that he didn't, was that a message of favorable message in some sense?
Absolutely a favorable message. You know, he totally respected everybody who stood up before him. He respected the actions that you took. He saw you not as crazy defendants who need to be punished and incarcerated, but as people of conscience who took a step that was not the common step. And he decided that the appropriate punishment was just bad enough that he had to find you guilty. And that was it. And that's part of doing a trial of that nature,
Right.
is to try to convince the court and to try to convince a jury, if there were a jury there, that that the conduct is such that it really doesn't deserve a serious criminal sanction. It deserves a blessing, actually.
Well, was there any way that could possibly have happened? I know we're maybe dreaming here, but you say restrained, but that could have possibly happened, right?
Yes, it certainly could have happened. Look, if we were in front of a jury of ordinary citizens, there's a tried and true method of trying to do a political case called jury nullification, where the jury basically is told that you can disregard the law. You know, notwithstanding facts that convince you that the defendant is guilty, you can find them not guilty. You can't do that with a judge unless you've got a really extraordinary judge. There are a few around. You know, occasionally one makes it to the bench. But it's rare. And in this case, we had a judge who was more or less middle of the road, who we certainly moved to understand why people were protesting stop and frisk.
Right.
You know, the judge, remember, this is a judge who's a criminal court judge who's seen motions to suppress. He's seen claims by criminal defendants in front of him, young men of color who claim that the police improperly stopped and frisked them. And, you know, the police have sort of delivered some other story about it. And the judge has said, okay, I believe the police officer and not the defendant. You know, this brought it out lively, and it made it very real that there were people concerned about it, that the practice itself was a racist practice. And this was only part of a much broader political movement to stop the practice from going forward. And it did for a while. It did. Now, unfortunately, we're back in business.
Is there anything else, anything you might have wanted to do a little differently or added, Marty? I know it's hindsight, but you were satisfied.
I was perfectly satisfied. I hope my clients were too.
Oh, absolutely.
We were. We were.
If that happens, then I'm happy too, you know.
I mean, we didn't expect that you were going to get us completely off and verdicts. I would have liked for that to happen, but I thought that it was much more a matter of, are we going to fight this in a way that puts our stance out in the midst of a broader embroilment in society over the issue of stop and frisk? And I think that helped, because when we were setting this, we talked with someone, Annette Dickerson was her name, from the Center for Constitutional Rights. And she said, well, we can't organizationally endorse this, but let me tell you this. We have a suit in on stop and frisk. It's an excellent legal case, and it is going nowhere. And we hope that what you all do in the streets will change the calculus on this.
Oh.
And I think it did contribute to that.
Absolutely. That's a great point. And you were involved in other trials, Carl, that also pushed the envelope forward, correct? As you say, in Brooklyn,
Where we did Brooklyn,
Queens.
and we did Queens. In Brooklyn, we actually won that trial. The judge threw the charges out because of what he considered bad actions on the part of the police. And he didn't say directly the prosecution, but he hinted at they collaborated in the concoction of a story that did not fit the reality. Because what actually happened in Brooklyn is that we did not get to the police station. The police stopped us about a quarter of a block from the police station and said, "This is an illegal assembly, leave or be arrested." And then when we got into court, the police denied that they did that. It was very clear
Oh, wow.
that they did. They had decided they weren't going to let us get in front of the place that time. And in Queens, they did a thing where they blocked off the police station and then invited us in.
Invited you in? Oh,
Yeah, they had like police barricades blocking.
I see. To get arrested inside? Yeah.
We marched up to it and we were stopping to.
We did 2 or 3 trials out of that, Carl, as I recall.
Yeah, they split the trials up, but we did a thing of like, what are we going to do? They've got barricades. And while we were discussing it, they opened the barricades. And we went in.
Carl, what I mostly remember from that trial is when the court sentenced you to be a legal observer and to watch what was going on in court. And then after a day of it, got freaked out and then commuted the rest of your sentence.
Yeah, because I had 5 days of watching the court. And when I made my first report on it, and then I said something about I'm going to look for the ways to spread this report, because it was like, it was as if the defendants of necessity had to be Black or Latino, because nobody else got brought before the case. Most of them had done nothing. You know, their offense was, there were a lot of stop and frisk generated things. And one thing about it is, one thing that needs to be pushed out there is the reason why so many, the arrestees around marijuana possession are so disproportionately Black and Latino, is because of the application of stop and frisk.
Stop and frisk, yes.
And it has continued even in the period where they weren't supposed to be, doing stop and frisk. And it's back up even higher now. And it really is taking something that's not illegal and making it illegal with the introduction of a police officer reaching into your pocket and taking out a legal amount of weed and saying it's exposed now, it's not legal.
Unbelievable. So it does sound like, if we have a couple minutes left, a new round of creative resistance and rebellion and perhaps new sort of civil disobedience and trials seem to be necessary to remind us of what we should have remembered. We should remember from 10 years ago. Would you agree with that?
If that's where the political movement goes, yes.
Yeah.
But only if the folks that make decisions like that about how to carry out political activity decide that that's one way to do it, then that's fine. But there are other ways as well.
Great point. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I am for taking to the streets and fighting the power and transforming the people for revolution as we do it.
And Steve, you final word on this. You are taking to the streets and the pulpits. How would you put it for the final minute?
Well, I will be taking part with Reverend William Barber in D.C. in June.
Okay.
So there is one signal effort that's led by a faith leader who's really got the attention of a large number of folks. So that's excellent news.
Mm-hmm.
This method of raising consciousness must never go away. It's key. And the question of the sleep that seems to the pall of ignorance and apathy that affects such a large part of every population of big nations, Russia, United States, and on we could go, is an astounding fact of life. And it is, I believe, a spiritual reality that very, very many humans are sound asleep to their own nature and to the possibilities of their society. So hoping to alert and awaken some part thereof, the movable middle, as I'm often fond of quoting that phrase, giving attention to who can change that's in the middle is key.
Well put, Stephen, and thank you also very much for being here. The other thing that I think is the key is to make sure that we all have Marty's cell phone number. All right, which we memorize. But thank you so very, very much. As I say, we haven't aged in 10 years. We will see each other again, I'm sure, in various forms and various activities and events. I'll probably be down there with Reverend Barber as well. Thank you so very, very much, all of you. It's been a
Great to be with you. Great to be with you. Wonderful.
Bye-bye.
Thanks.
I'm here.
Thank you again. And thank you so very, very much again for watching us here on The Radical Imagination. This is Jim Vrettos. We'll see you again next week on The Radical Imagination.